Hi everybody, how's it going? And welcome to another video. Happy New Year as well. So I want to start out this new year by doing another video. What I want to do today is I want to do a book review on a book I had just read. Now, I want to talk about this. There will be spoilers in this video, so I'll say that right now. There will be spoilers. The book that I will be reviewing is the book Blindsight by Peter Watts. So I do want to talk about it. Now, ordinarily, when I do a review of something, whether it's a movie review or book review, usually I liked the book or movie or album or, whatever I'm reviewing. Usually I liked it. Now, that wasn't really the case here. I do want to talk about that. I want to talk about this book. This book is pretty popular, Blindsight. There are people who really like this book a lot. There are people who just don't really care for it that much. So I do want to talk about that. First, I think the best place to start is the cover. This is the cover. So you see it's got like a spaceship on it. It's got this thorny thing, which is called Rorschach, which I'll talk about later. But now, I didn't really care for this cover that much. I really liked a lot of book covers from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I think there's some excellent book covers done at that time. And this looks like it was kind of cobbled together, maybe with Photoshop. I really don't care how this turned out. I mean, there's just been so many excellent book covers over the years. I mean, if you go and look up the covers for the sci-fi novel Sorellus by Stanislaus Lem, if you look up the covers to that novel, you see there's some really great covers in the different editions that Sorellus has come out. But yeah, I didn't really care for the cover that much. Now, I do want to talk about the book. I will be honest, this was a difficult read. Most people do not deny that. Most people are in agreement with the fact that it is a difficult read. Usually you'll hear the word dense used to describe this book. It's kind of some, dense material. It's difficult to take in. I heard one person say that he felt like he needed 4 PhDs to get through the book. So there's a lot of techno jargon or techno babble in this book. Some of it, I don't know, might be necessary, but a lot of it I don't think is. Now, this book is in the subgenre of science fiction called the first contact story, meaning it's humanity's first contact with extraterrestrials. And what happens is there's these meteors or comets that start coming toward the Earth, a whole bunch of them, and the people of Earth are not sure what they are. The year's about 2083. That's when this takes place. These comets are coming toward Earth, and then what happens is there's some type of alien camera where they take a survey of the entire planet, and there's some sort of I believe it's a radio signal that goes out, and these extraterrestrials had sent this signal. So then the humans go looking for these extraterrestrials. First, they send out some drones to find it. Then they send out an actual spaceship called the Theseus with a crew. And the crew is a different crew for sure. You have different people with different abilities. Sometimes they're referred to as kind of a misfit crew, but I wouldn't really say that. They're people with different abilities and different types of consciousness, because that's the central theme of this book is consciousness. What is consciousness? So you have the narrator. The narrator is a person who had been lobotomized to where the part of his brain that has emotion has been completely removed. Sort of a little bit like Spock, but not entirely. Then you have, the ship itself, the Theseus, which is an AI. So you have the ship. Then you also have a vampire. And the vampire, I believe, is the captain of the ship. Now, when I first heard that there was going to be a vampire in this, I was like, oh, that's pretty stupid. Why would they ruin the book by doing that? But then, I found out, Peter Watts, who wrote the book, he has a very interesting take on the vampire, something you haven't seen before, something that's new. The way he has vampires is they're not like Dracula or anything like that. He has vampires where they were a kind of human that lived alongside modern humans and Neanderthals about 100,000 years ago or so. And they were like predators. They were like the perfect predator. They had, good vision. They were very agile. They were strong. They were fast. They had long eye teeth. And they preyed on modern humans. Now, what ended up happening was that over the years, humans began to create more structures that had right angles in them, more buildings and more structures. And right angles trigger sort of like a seizure response to these vampires, and it causes them an immense amount of pain. So they can't survive in a world with all these right angles. So that's why when you hold up like a cross to a vampire, they feel pain, not because of religion, not because of Catholicism, but because of the fact that the cross is a right angle, and that, hurts these vampires. So, eventually they died out. They were brought back later on with vampire DNA, kind of similar to how the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park were brought back, kind of similar to that. So I thought that was a very interesting take on the vampire. At first I'm like, oh no, vampires, I don't know. Then, the way Peter Watts does it, very interesting take on something like the vampire. Something that, you've seen a lot of in a lot of movies and books and whatnot, but he basically succeeded in reinventing the vampire. But then you have another crew member in this novel who's called the Gang of Four. And it's a woman who has like 4 different personalities. Each personality has its own unique mindset and its own unique skill set. So I thought that was interesting. It's like 4 like unique different people in one person. And you have, like I said, the ship itself is an AI. There's a soldier on board and a couple biologists. Now, I should mention at this point that Peter Watts, from what I understand, has a PhD in marine biology, and he was a biologist, which is why this novel is very sciencey. This is by far the most sciencey science fiction novel I've ever read. Like I said, there's a lot of jargon, a lot of technobabble. You feel a need to maybe want to look stuff up. And I like looking stuff up. However, in this case, I didn't really want to. I didn't really want to take the time because I thought that kind of disrupted the flow of the novel. But yeah, I really felt like there was a need to look a lot of things up. And I did read it on a Kindle, so I was able to look up certain meanings of different words, which you could easily do on a Kindle. But it was a difficult read. There are a lot of conversations in this, a lot of, like I said, like techno jargon, techno babble kind of stuff. There are a lot of big words. Some people refer to it as a lot of like information dumping. I felt that there wasn't really a need for a lot of this information. I was hoping it would go someplace, but it kind of didn't go anywhere. But getting back to the story narrative, and there's not really that much of a story narrative to this. It's kind of weak in that regard, but there are some interesting things, and there's a really interesting thing coming up. So they find the alien ship, and it's basically in the shape of a crown of thorns, and it's called Rorschach. And now I thought there was a lack of like info on Rorschach, what Rorschach was, if Rorschach itself was a being. But inside Rorschach are these aliens, and they're called scramblers. They're basically like starfish. They're starfish like, I should say. Not exactly starfish. They have 9 arms. They have this segmented arms that are kind of described as being sort of like a spinal column in a way. They're kind of like bony, but they have eyes all over their arms, hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of eyes. And the big thing with these creatures is they are not conscious. They have no conscience at all. They're not conscious. They're, no sentience at all. They're sort of in a way like a kind of biological machine. And the question this book attempts to answer is consciousness necessary to have a high level of intelligence, or is consciousness a kind of evolutionary dead end, or like an evolutionary crutch? Does consciousness hinder the technological development of a species? Because got to keep in mind, we don't really know a whole lot about consciousness and what consciousness is. And these aliens, they're, like I said, they're not conscious, they're not self-aware, but they are super intelligent. Peter Watts says they're many times more intelligent than humans, but they're just not conscious. So he's saying that is consciousness, in fact, kind of like a crutch, kind of something that hinders a species rather than helps it? That at one point in our past we needed consciousness, but then as we became more technologically advanced, maybe then we didn't, but we still have it. And he's arguing that consciousness is, like I said, kind of more of a hindrance than something that helps. So that's really interesting. That's the whole gist of the book, is the question of consciousness. Is consciousness something that's necessary to have if you're a really intelligent species? Is it necessary? Or, like I said, is it kind of a crutch? So that's the gist of the whole book. It's an interesting idea, interesting food for thought. Like I said, the aliens, they're these like starfish-like things, very alien. A lot of times aliens will be kind of anthropomorphic, not these. These are very alien. They look very different than aliens that you've seen in other things before. And yeah, there's just a lot of talk about the nature of consciousness in this. Now, to talk about what I didn't like about the book, I didn't really find the book to be very enjoyable. I didn't find that it had a strong story narrative. This was not by any means a page turner, and I thought it was kind of a chore to get through. However, I did like the aliens and what he had to say about the aliens. The vampire stuff was really cool, but I thought that there was a lot of time wasted on a lot of things. I felt like this book should have been shorter. This book was nearly 400 pages. I felt like had it been 200 pages, I felt like I would have liked it more. I would have liked it more if it was a much shorter book, because I think you could say everything Peter Watts wanted to say in about 200 pages or so. I think that could have been achieved. Probably even less. But for whatever reason, it's nearly 400 pages. And I don't know if, that was Peter Watts' doing or if that was the publisher. Maybe the publisher demanded a longer book. I don't know. That might have been the case. I just didn't think it needed to be as long as it was. I thought there was a lot of things in here that were kind of unnecessary. There's really gets very sciencey. Like I said, this is by far the most sciencey science fiction novel I've ever read. Gets really sciencey, and I didn't feel like that was really needed. I was always waiting for this kind of like big aha moment with the science, and there never was. The big aha moment was what I already mentioned, the whole thing with consciousness with these aliens. But yeah, so that was really what I thought of this book. I just thought that it was too long. Had it been shorter, I would have liked it more. If I were to give this, stars, I would give it 5 out of 10 stars. And the 5 stars only comes from the fact that the aliens are cool and interesting and something new. And so is the vampire, and how Peter Watts, kind of like I said, reinvented the vampire in a very unique and believable and cool sort of way. But other than that, yeah, it was very difficult to read. Now, what ultimately ends up happening at the end is these scramblers, these aliens, the crew gets on board the Rorschach, which is their ship. And like I said, I didn't think there was a good explanation on Rorschach. Is this a living organism? I wasn't really too clear on that. Maybe another reader might have picked up on something. But again, there was just a lot of different confusion created in the book by, the narration and who was talking and when. The narrator is Siri, the individual who, had part of his brain removed. He's the narrator of all this. And what happens is the crew goes on board Rorschach, and they end up fighting these scramblers. The crew ends up getting killed. From what I understand, the Theseus itself ends up like destroying Rorschach, and at the last moment, Siri ends up escaping in some sort of escape pod, and he survives and then lives to essentially tell his story. And yeah, like I said, not an easy read. It's usually considered, or usually called, dense. And I think a lot of people feel that way. I read this because I've seen this on, those YouTube channels where people kind of rank them all. They'll like rank all these books. There's one called Book Build where, he put this as S tier, meaning the best. And, I agree with him on a lot of his S tier books. Not so much this one. I could see where some people would really like it, though. It's that kind of thing. It's just not for everyone. But there are some people who would really like this kind of science fiction. I wanted a bit more of a story. I wanted a bit more of a narrative. And it focused on some really interesting themes, especially the ones detailing and dealing with consciousness. What is consciousness? Is it a necessary thing? Another interesting thing mentioned in this novel was that Peter Watts talked about chimps and orangutans. And I guess it's generally believed that chimps are smarter than orangutans. However, when orangutans see themselves in a mirror, they're aware of who they are. They're self-aware. Chimps don't always show signs of self-awareness when looking at themselves in a mirror. So I thought that was an interesting thing too. So yeah, that's really what this is about, consciousness and sort of like a study of consciousness. And in that regard, I liked it. Like I said, I probably would have given this something closer, much closer to 10 stars had it been shorter. If it was about 200 pages, I would have liked this a lot more. It did not need to be that long. And like I said, maybe Peter Watts had no control over this. Maybe that's what the publisher wanted. That very well could be the case. But yeah, that's all I got. I just wanted to do this book review. Like I said, I didn't really care for the book that much. Usually, when I review something, I review it because I liked it. That wasn't really the case here. But, anyways, I hope you enjoyed this review. If you watched this video, as always, I thank you for watching. Have a good night.